Thank you, Ken. Before we start, just like to make a comment that though we're in a period of national mourning, the council business has to continue. And so the meeting tonight is going ahead as scheduled. But before we get into the meeting, could I ask that we have a period of reflection, a period of 1 minute silence. So if you all stand, if you're able to. Thank you very much. Okay, now we now start the meeting formally. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee, held on the 12th of September 2022. My name is Councillor Peter Marriott and I am the Chairman of the committee. Members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep yourself on mute when you are not speaking. Please can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. If the webcast stream fails, then we'll also have to adjourn until they're able to reset the connection. It's a formal part. Thank you. Can I just welcome Councillor Julian Spence to this committee? Thank you. Welcome to see you. Okay, item 1 on the agenda. Can we confirm the minutes of the last meeting as a correct copy of what's occurred? Agreed. Item 2, apologies for absence. Ken.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from absence from Councillor Jan Floyd Douglas and Councillor John Gray and Councillor Sally Dixon.
Item 3, any disclosures of interest?
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Any questions by members of the public?
None received.
Questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, let's go to another part 1 matters. Part 2 matters of report. Item 6. This is where we review the committee's terms of reference, which are pages 1 to 4 of the agenda. Ken, you're going to report on this.
Yes, Chairman. We have every year we look at the committee's terms of reference just to make sure that they are still fit for purpose, and if we want to make recommendations for any changes. As you will see, there is a number of, I've left the track changes on there because there has been a couple of areas that have been suggested for change. Should be in track changes on them. Not?
No.
Okay, well, we'll now I've got to try and think what the track changes were.
One was the planning committees.
Oh, yes, the planning committees were amended on there as they were down as the Eastern and Western. Also, Obviously, the Joint Planning Committee will be removed, because that's no longer in existence. And we also added Licensing and Regulatory Committee, we added the subcommittees and the general purposes onto there. Apologies, I thought I'd left the track changes on them, obviously, because they've not come up.
And there was a small typo.
There was a small typo, yes,
Under
which had
the
changed.
external audit.
But if there are any other changes to the terms of reference that members wish to recommend. The other thing was that I think there was something in there about recommendations, not actions, wasn't there? Yes. Because obviously we changed the terminology for the internal audit to actions, not recommendations. So that has been changed as well.
Which section is that on? Okay, is that section C, page 2?
Yes, 5 says to consider internal audit reports detailing recommendations not implemented, and at the end of that it says internal audit recommendations. So they were both changed over to actions.
This essentially is the same as the same section in the Constitution. Yeah, otherwise.
Yes.
I've got 1 or 2 other comments on this. With just for information, on the corporate governance section, when we say to review the council's compliance with its own and other published regulations, is there a specific list of regulations that we should be ticking the box against?
That I'm not sure of.
Chair, I don't believe that's compiled in the organisation. I've never seen it, but there are so many.
I just wonder how we are compliant. We don't know what we're complying against.
Question. So we suppose the question is compliant against statutes, all the statutes. Well, first of all, our statement of accounts audited by the external auditors. So anything from financial position would be covered by that. Regulatory is covered by the borough solicitor. So anything to do with applying legislation. In terms of giving us assurance that we are compliant, there isn't an all-encompassing assurance process to inform compliance against all statutes. There is a reporting regime with government on many of the different services that we have for this statutory requirement. So there is a number of ways of obtaining assurance, but there's no all-encompassing assurance framework we worked in. I suppose the AGS statute touches on some of that in terms of the control framework overall and how we operate as an organisation to ensure that we are remaining compliant. And that's probably as close as we get to it.
So if there is a change of legislation, then it's going to the borough solicitor to advise on what the changes are and how we go to meet with it.
Partly that depends also what that change in legislation is. If it's financial, it's down to 151 to ensure compliance as well. It's down to the individual professional heads of service. So if it's environmental, it's down to the head of service responsible for environmental service. If it's planning compliance matter, it's down to the head of service responsible for planning. So it is divvied up across the different professionalisms. And then all of these people are members of professional bodies, so they have to adhere to standards.
Okay, so it just seems to be a little weakness there that we've as an audit committee, we don't actually know the details of what the legislation is and how that how we are complying with it. We rely on witnesses actually to tell us that there is a change or there's some weaknesses in compliance.
Yes, it's a fair comment, but also it's a big comment in respect of when you look at the sheer volume of legislation that we have to comply with. There is no one single source of that information in one place. So it borders on the realms of impossibility to some degree of being able to demonstrate we're complying with all of it, other than the governance processes that we actually have within the council.
Okay. That's something that we can come back to in some future meeting. I just think there to be a little bit more detail around that stuff.
It's worth doing some research on that.
Graham, would you like to speak?
Chairman, well, firstly, good evening, Chairman. Good evening, councillors, and good evening, Councillor Spence. I'm sorry we've not met yet, and I always like to be in the room. Apologies, I had a funeral late this afternoon in Southampton, so I couldn't actually get up to Godalming in time for the start of the meeting. So sorry I can't be in the room. Yeah, Chairman, just one point on this around the committee and the opportunity for the committee to fulfil this part of its responsibility is through the letter of representation that the committee consider and sign off each year alongside the accounts, where there's a specific question in there around compliance with regulations throughout the year. So as well as Peter quite rightly said in the annual governance statement, we also check with the borough solicitor before we complete our letter of representation, and we check that with the external auditors. So that will be coming to you hopefully in the November meeting alongside the accounts chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Graham. I think maybe consider this as a future meeting, but perhaps some explanation could be put into the section of the Constitution that explains what Graham has just said. What do members have any views on this? Okay. Yes, there's what I had on this section. Actually, a slight wording change in section 8.4, where it said the audit committee will be composed of 8 councillors. It's composed of up to 8 councillors. So are we happy with the section, members?
Well, I presume all these changes will be caught.
Yes, yes, all the changes. I mean, I have already changed the few bits that we discussed in our chairman's briefing.
Other members of the committee, are you happy with the fact that you don't need to see any minor changes?
I could save the revised changes that send out and circulate the revised terms of reference just for any comments.
I think, Chairman, that would be quite a good idea, because it's difficult to catch all this as we're reading it in a very bitty manner. And I think if we could close any comments by the end of this week, that would be.
Yeah.
Would that be in order?
Yeah.
Chairman?
Yeah,
I think that most of them might be.
Yes.
Thanks.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Good. Let's move on to item 7 then, the committee and report, pages 5 to 14. Again, Ken.
Yes. As members who have been on the committee for a while will be aware, annually we do an annual report just to outline the work that has been carried out over the year. So it's mainly to note, unless there are any specific comments, or any blinding errors that I've made in my report.
Are there any comments? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chair. Just small points. I mean, in the, I guess in the second paragraph on the first page, say the committee met 4 times in September, November, and March. It might be worth just adding in
twice
in November. Yeah. And then the list of participants. Councillor Wicks stepped down and was replaced by Councillor Dixon halfway through the year. Was she not?
I will double check that. I think she might have started after this report finished, but I will double check that.
Yes, I mean, our last meeting was in March and she was certainly on the committee then.
Okay, I will double check that and amend that.
She might have sent her apologies, but she, she
Yeah,
was in a position to apologise.
I will double check that, Councillor Seaborn.
Since it's supposed to be 8 of us, if we say a vacancy missing.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm really following Councillor Seaborn's point, that last sentence that I up to, and then show it off the committee at specific dates would be useful, I think.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I can do that.
On to page 7, I noticed on the section 1.3, the last sentence of 1.3, where it says at its September meeting, 2021, I guess, the committee requested evidence that we were complying with the habitats regulation. So that's an action that we need to follow up on.
It is indeed, yes. It has been raised a number of times in the meeting, and I believe that Zach did present a report or an explanation at the meeting, but we can check when that response came in.
Yeah, dates and yes.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, Chair, that actual matter is raised at virtually every planning meeting, and we have had sufficient explanation at each time. And I think the planning committee is satisfied that we are compliant with the habitat regulations as they stand now.
I think the issue, Councillor Wilson, is that the we need to make ourselves sure that each planning application satisfies the regulation. It's not a blanket regulation that you can just apply to everything that we do without considering the individual application. So,
and I can assure you, Chair, that this is raised at each planning committee.
It should be, yeah, because there should be well, we did say there should be a pro forma for each planning application, to go through the requirements.
Councillor Hunter registered to speak on this item. You that's coming.
Yeah. Councillor Hyman, you wish to speak on this?
Thank you very much. Have the other members spoken? Because obviously the things that members raise, if they want to raise them first, then it saves me from stealing their thunder, so to speak. They are the committee members, and if they've done their homework and they've got issues to raise, they should have the opportunity to raise them first. But if other members are satisfied for me to go last and have said what they said, I'll happily speak now.
I'm sure they would be happy to hear you speak now, Councillor Hyman.
Right, thanks. Well, on the subject that you raised, I'll come to that in a second. The terms of reference. I'm sorry I was unable to join the meeting because the wrong code was set out, so I was 10 minutes late. But not for want of trying, I promise you. If you don't mind, if I can also just ask if you can try and make your diction in that room as clear as possible, because the mic that's in the middle of the room really doesn't pick it up very well, and the webcast and the Zoom recordings don't make it easy for, well, officers and myself to necessarily hear exactly what you're saying. And obviously this is about governance, it's important business. So if I can just ask if you make sure that speaking clearly towards the ceiling. That might help. I apologise if that's an inappropriate comment, but I thought I'd say for the benefit of other officers who are far too polite to say things like that. If we go back to the previous item, where and I don't want to speak on that item, but just to mention that 8.3A1 and 2 of the terms of reference charges the audit function with compliance with the SIPFA Solis framework called delivering good governance in local government, and reviewing legal compliance. Now, that delivering good governance in local government, they want 150 quid off me if I want to buy a copy of it. I think it's only about 25 or 30 pages long, so it's £5 a page, and I've got 2 pages for free on from another website. But I wondered whether, if we've got a copy of that, because obviously whether members have a copy of that, because if we don't, then we're not going to be able to. You can't be certain, and other members can't be certain whether or not we are complying with the framework from 2016, so you know, and also being charged with reviewing legal compliance. That's very much the situation which you were on when I joined, and that's are members confident of the law? How are you confident of the law? How can you review legal compliance with the systems we have in place at the moment? Because you have to take the advice. What's the point in reviewing something if you're just going to get the same advice every time? Where is the scrutiny? Where is the opportunity to check whether we are complying, or whether it's just somebody saying we're complying? Because we know the law was, in respect of habitats, was confirmed in 2018, confirmed that everyone had been doing it wrong, and everybody's still doing it wrong. So, and to update you on that, I have got a meeting arranged. So someone has arranged it for me, possibly the portfolio holder for the environment. I have a meeting with her, the portfolio holder, and the head of planning, and I think 1 or 2 others possibly, on Wednesday, in respect of the issues that were raised at your November meeting, Chairman, when you had put this question forward, and the head of planning gave I think 20-minute presentation, a verbal update, explaining to you what additional information you would was going to be added to the pro forma and the habitats regulations assessment that the council was making. So a year later now, I'm about to get some information, apparently, on how we might start to comply with this, but I think I know what I'm going to be told, and I don't think it's a public meeting. This information should be in an appropriate assessment, and we don't have one, so we're still making those decisions outside of the law, as far as the National Planning Practice Guidance and People over Wind and Sweetman ruling have established. And of course, it's not for us to decide otherwise. That is what we have to work on. But I was going to just point out that in this report here, there is no mention of the head of planning's verbal report, which that 20-minute report on the 8th of November last, aiming to make our pro formas compliant. And that was for want, and he explained that it was for want of bird numbers and evidence of the effectiveness of the mitigation. We don't have that, and it's still not in any appropriate assessment anywhere. So I think it's vital, with the comment that's there, requesting evidence that we're complying with the habitats regulations under paragraph 1.3 that you've just referred to, Chairman. It's vital that you get to know about that, and as you don't have an appropriate assessment that you can send me, I assume, if you do, please send one, then you can be certain that you're not complying at the moment, that the council isn't complying, and that this committee is not discharging its duties in terms of complete legal compliance. But this has been going on 15 years, so it's not just you. It's not a personal criticism of any of the members there, other than it is your responsibility. And if you turn a blind eye and continue to, then that's your responsibility, obviously. There is also, I think it's at paragraph 7.1 here, page 16 of the PDF. I've got 3 different page numbers on every page just about here, so I hope I'm not confusing, but at paragraph 7.1 somewhere, that was probably the previous item. No, it says working from home where have the risks been considered. And have we assessed the risks of not completing AAs? And I don't know that you can be satisfied in any way that those two have been done to your satisfaction. I would imagine. I mean, it's you who has to be satisfied that you are compliant with the law and that you are allowing us as councillors to do our duty to our residents, which at the moment I feel like I'm being stymied and have been for a long time, and prevented from conducting my duties properly under the law. But if you'd make sure that I can in future, please, I'd very much appreciate it. I have been trying for many years, as other councillors have pointed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. And there are a number of items in the section that you have pointed out in section 7.1, which list things which need to be considered and included. I'm not sure how far we've got with this in terms of there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 separate items here. Can you say how far we've got through each of these?
So that was under the under the strategic risk register items. No, I can't tell you how far we've got with them, but I will have a look at them. I will get a response on where we are with each of them, and then I will come back to the committee offline to let you know how we are with each of the items. Okay.
Thank you. But this is something we would need to keep going for each of the
yes.
next.
What I will suggest, Chairman, and I will accept responsibility for this. We did initiate an action plan probably about 18 months ago, and then it sort of fell off the radar, and I haven't been including it. So I will reinstate that action plan, and then we've got that to follow through and get answers for. So I will reinstate that.
Do these items have to stay as like a separate action plan list? We already have an action.
What I can do is I can find out the answers to all those, and if there are any that are outstanding, they then can go on to the formal action plan.
Yeah.
But anything that has already been addressed, you won't have to worry about putting that on.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. 7.1 starts in March 2023, so it's nice to have to be forward looking, but we haven't got there yet. So 2022. Please. The other point is that this is just a report of what's happened, and that March 2022 was the last meeting we had. So as a list of what happened at the meeting, it is correct. We're quite right that we need to review it, but not under this particular item. Presumably we deal with it next time we have a review of the risk register.
Yeah, I'm happy to bring the risk register back to the next audit meeting, and we can see how we progressed with these points.
That'd be useful. Have that as a special meeting. Do you think? Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, my fear is that it can lead to a very long discussion, and I think it's best if it's done in a completely open manner without any restrictions or worried about people like myself making a fool of myself and my comments.
Any other points on this item 7? Okay, thank you. Move on to item 8 on the agenda, the annual government statement. That is to approve pages 15 to 28. Patrick, do you have something to say on this?
Yep, Councillor Seaborn, thank you for your comments. I've got them on sort of grammatical things and otherwise that I'd overlooked. I can't disagree with any of them, so I'll be incorporating them all. I think there were a couple of items that you wanted to raise and discuss. I mean, the AGS is, we spent a lot of time last year working through the formatting and the structure, and I'd like to think we're quite happy with where we've got it to. From a governance point of view, this year's been much quieter than last year. I know councillors have already had the opportunity to feed back to me on it, but I welcome any other comments you may have.
Our chief executive and leader are content.
Yes, so the leader is content with it. The chief executive, or joint chief executive, as he is now known, did, however, want to remove. There's a paragraph that had been inserted with regards to the future role of the Section 151 officer, and the joint chief executive has removed that, I think, purely because those changes in that arrangement relate to the following financial year. I think that was the logic behind that decision, but I know, Councillor Seaborn, you had some comments about that, whether it was the content of the AGS itself or just
similar to that. Yeah, well, there were 2 points I wanted to raise. Firstly, and I apologise for this, I should have picked it up about 3 years ago, but the list of, in section 4, the list of things that we're required to provide assurance on, corporate governance is required to provide assurance on. Nowhere does it actually mention reporting, specific word reporting. We do an awful lot of that. So, you know, at the end of the day, we produce an annual financial report, do financial planning, we do performance, but then we actually produce a report at the end of it, which we spend a lot of time scrutinising and to approve. We have to send returns to governments on things like level of housing stock, greenhouse gas emissions, all that kind of stuff. And I think ultimately, as an audit committee, we were probably required to keep an eye on all of that stuff to make sure it's properly governed. So just inserting in that list somewhere something that reflects that we do actually have a responsibility for keeping an eye on reporting, which is it's sort of implicit there. You do things and the report generally drops out of it, but nowhere is it actually listed as a specific item. So
Yeah, I agree.
If colleagues agree, I think it might be worth just adding 1 or 2 words in there to try and deal with that.
I think so. Good point. Can I add to that also my usual comment about version control? I'm pleased with so far this actual document, so at least what we discussed there.
Good. The other point I wanted to discuss, but it's not actually part of the annual governance this year, but it was stimulated by reference to the Section 151 officer, and that's I think our next council meeting we're going to be asked to approve roles, and maybe we can discuss it at the end, but I'd like some assurance from officers that the legislation actually permits one 151 officer to oversee 2 separate councils, because they're going to be inevitably significant conflicts of interest. And one that immediately comes to mind is that Guildford haven't yet published their accounts because they don't have enough staff to deal with it. That's on public record. And if we have a shared 151 officer, how does he or she settle on allocation of resources, because one or other council is going to have to suffer in terms of sharing resources to deal with that problem. So Waverley's, I presume, is in good shape in terms of staffing for getting annual reports out. Guildford clearly hasn't, and it's on record. I can understand the chief finance officer making a judgment as to where the resources should go, but then as a 151 officer can actually put their hands on their hearts and say, for Waverley, the best thing has not happened because we've had to lend resources to Guildford, and on the other hand, for Guildford saying, yes, we've done the best thing for the council. So I tried to find something in the legislation on this, and I found legislation that deals with combined authorities, but we're not a combined authority. We're separate authorities with a combined senior leadership team. And I couldn't find anything there. But in fairness, I think all I'm asking is, could we get some legal assurance on this? Because I didn't have the time or inclination to wade through all the relevant legislation, because I don't actually know what it is. But it's just something that's worrying me. It might be a question of job titles. We might have a chief finance officer who is the Section 15 officer for Guildford and the Section 151 officer for Waverley. But I'm just concerned that there might be conflicts of interest arising from having one Section 151 officer overseeing both the councils, because of the responsibility to hand on it up and say, the accounting effort has given its best shot for one council, for an individual council, rather than the combined entity. But you may be able to answer that now, but actually I think you should deal with that at the end of this rather than later.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Brian.
Chairman, would you like me to deal with that now? I'm happy to, or whenever you want, whenever you'd like me to, I can respond directly to Councillor Seaborn's points.
If you would like to, please.
Sure. So, firstly, Guildford have published their accounts now. They were 2 weeks late, so it was about, I can't remember the exact date, it's about middle of August. Secondly, the council, whenever that is, I think the date's been moved now because of the bank holiday, won't be being asked to consider roles. They'll be being asked to approve the recommendation of the Joint Appointments Committee to appoint the Section 151 officer joint across the two councils. So that's what they'll be asked to do. And thirdly, there is nothing in the regulations that prevent a Section 151 officer working across two councils. I'm doing it at the moment, and the Section 151 is a designation as opposed to a job. So under the new structure, the job will be Joint Head of Finance, and then the designation of Section 151 officer will be attached to that job by both councils. And the important thing is the SITFA's guide to Section 151 officer role, which is a very comprehensive guide, and there are 5 principles in there that both councils have satisfied themselves that the arrangement that's proposed meets the requirements under that code. So the Section 151 itself is Section 151 of the 1972 Local Government Act, and it's 2 sentences. And it's relating to the robust financial affairs of a local authority. And since 1974, that has been developed out into something much more comprehensive. And as I say, it's now, the spirit of the law is now articulated through quite a detailed code of practice by SITFA. And that's the test for local authorities. And that there are shared 151 officers in many collaborations up and down the council. In fact, the rules and the code are flexible enough for one local authority to take over another. So, for example, Essex have just taken over the financial functions of Thurrock on the instruction of the Secretary of State. So their 151 will be Essex's 151 will be appointed to be Thurrock's for a while. So there's a lot of flexibility in there, and it happens quite a lot. So I hope that answers your points, Councillor Seaborn. Happy to get into more detail if you want to, Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Seaborn, give it the
not entirely, but I'm not sure this particular item is the place to deal with it. This conflict still worries me in that it's not a combined authority. if Essex were told to look after Thurrock, then they were effectively combined for the purposes of sorting out presumably Thurrock's accounts. We have two separate accounting activities going on here, being managed by one team. It still concerns me a little that 1151 officer is going to end up with conflict, but it'd be good to actually see that guidance. It's always a challenge to get hold of stuff online. I found some, but not all of it. If that can be shared, that might be helpful. I've got my mind at rest, because if it's legal, then that's really all I'm concerned about. I might not agree with it, but if the law says it's okay, that's that's the be all and end all. I'm not going to dispute the law. Thank you.
Councillor Spence. Thank you, Chairman. As a new member, both of the council and this committee, I'd just like to say, I've used this annual government statement, something as a reference point for me in learning how the council is governed, the controls and the processes. And I'd just like to put on record that I found it a very clear document, easy to follow, and I think it gives a very good summary of those various controls and processes. And I can clearly see that a lot of work has gone ahead of me, if you like, from both previous members of this committee and officers, and I'd like to compliment you all on them. Thank you.
Thank you. Possibly, if I may ask Councillor Seaborn, if we had a process to resolve or to address potential conflicts of interest, is that what you're looking for? Whether there's a governance process in place to address potential conflicts of interest, or the 151 officer?
Well, I think it's slightly higher than that. I mean, it is actually around what the law allows. So I went back and looked at the 1972 introduction of the 151 officer, and it doesn't really say very much, but it does say a local authority. And here we're dealing with two local authorities, and therein lies the issue. And then I found elsewhere reference to combined authorities, but we're not a combined authority. Two authorities with a combined leadership team. So all I'm really looking for is assurance that somewhere in the legislation and guidance, this is actually a permitted activity, because if it's not, then I'm just worrying that there are these potentials.
But assuming it is a permitted activity,
well, in
then
that case, that's fine.
I take your point that there may be conflicts of interest. How do they get resolved? And is there a process in place to ensure that is handled correctly?
So 2 points on this. Firstly, the regulatory matter that Councillor Seaborn mentions is covered by a SIP from the documentation that Graham refers to show that actually it is a legal position. It's a very common position across the whole of the UK council family. More specifically around conflicts of interest, this is a collaboration of two authorities collaborating with a joint senior management team at the moment. It hasn't gone any further than that. So there are the staff bases and the resources of both authorities are entirely separate at this point in time. And in terms of managing conflict of interest, there is an agreed inter-authority agreement that addresses that matter. Whether it's entirely comprehensive, obviously, will be a test over time. That may require some adjustment to the inter-authority agreement, but as it stands, there is an agreement that tries to cover all eventualities of where conflict may arise between the two authorities interacting together.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
If Councillor Seaborn is satisfied that it is legal, which it sounds as if it can happen, would we, as an audit committee, have an oversight of conflicts of interest? Which committee would it normally go to?
So ultimately, within the terms of reference, if it's a governance issue, it's effectively a conflict of interest, which usually a conflict of interest would be a governance matter. But by its nature, it would be this committee that would look at that and how that's being dealt with, and the processes that are being used to ensure that Waverley, because you're representing Waverley's interests, are actually being looked after from a government's perspective.
Yeah, so it would be within our remit, which I think might make you a little bit happier, Councillor.
Yes, I think so. There's some mechanism to deal with it. But as I said, it's the legal basis for us. And if we've got assurance on that, that's really what I was seeking to get, because I can see this potential. But if it's happening elsewhere.
How such a conflict be recognised? What form would that take?
Well, I quoted you the example. I mean, Graham says that the financial report for Guildford has now been issued, but 2 weeks ago when I was going through this for the first time, I think it was on record that it had been delayed because of the shortage of staff. So I think we'd all be aware that resources possibly are going to have to be moved around by the senior leadership team from one council to the other to deal with priorities. And there's an inevitable consequence that if you sort out someone else's problem, the place where the resources are coming from, be it either side, could have a short-term, could be suffering. I don't have a problem with that in terms of the senior leadership team. It's just that because that's their job, to try and get the best average outcome for the combined councils. It's having a 151 officer who's got to put his hand or her hand on their heart and say that it is the best thing for one or other of the councils.
Chairman, I think really, Councillor Seaborn, what you're describing in terms of the example you've given is more around a risk matter, and it's something under the audit committee's terms of reference to ensure there's appropriate risk framework in place to identify where there's risk, and that's a resource risk where through the collaboration there may be some sharing of expertise between the two authorities, that Waverley, for instance, isn't left short with the deficit of that expertise capacity in order to assist Guildford. But that's a risk judgment, and it's appropriate from a risk perspective rather than a conflict perspective. It's not so much a conflict as in an operational risk that's being taken.
This could be a long discussion, I think. It's best for elsewhere. I don't think I'll disagree with you. But I think I've raised the issue. It doesn't actually have anything to do with us approving this annual governance statement. Just thought it'd be timely to have a discussion before we confront it with an issue. If there isn't an issue, then it goes away. But rather do it now than wait until we've actually got a problem. So thank you for the time. The offer of the sit for guidance. If that lays it to rest, then I apologise for wasting everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
Well, Chairman, I was going to offer a way of preventing it from being a long discussion, because I think it's actually a really good discussion and a right one for the audit committee to be having. I think Peter hit the nail on the head by referring to the inter-authority agreement, because that is the document, the legal document that articulates the collaboration between both councils in a governance sense, and both councils have approved the inter-authority agreement. So what I was going to suggest is that this committee, because it's new, the inter-authority agreement, actually this committee exercises its governance role by asking for a review of the inter-authority agreement. Its operation in practice maybe annually, and that might satisfy it, because I think everything that the committee are talking about is the right thing for the committee to be talking about, because you are charged with governance. But the inter-authority agreement is the framework that both councils have agreed to do business with one another under, and therefore that is the governance document. So I don't know what other collaborations do, but I would imagine their audit committee or equivalent take a keen interest in how the inter-authority agreement is being operated. So maybe you want to do that, Chairman.
I think that sounds a good idea, actually. Is that something, again, we can raise as a special meeting, just looking at that particular topic?
Chairman, you might want to just put it under your recurrent work programme and bring it to one of the quieter meetings each year. because there hasn't been a huge amount. It was only agreed in I think it was April or May by both councils. So not a lot has happened under the agreement yet, but it will do in time. So you could just add it to your programme and look at it once a year and ask officers to come in and just report on the collaboration activity under the agreement.
Yes, okay. What sort of time, what time of the year do you think that would be appropriate?
I mean, I'd suggest the all. Sorry. June. Okay, well, there's an offer of June. Yeah, June.
I'm looking at how many items are on each meeting.
I think June's a good call actually, Kimberly, because next June it will be a year old, the inter-authority agreement, and therefore that would probably be an appropriate time for the audit committee to have a look.
With respect, Chair, that will also be the first meeting of the audit committee after the new council is appointed. So it's a good opportunity for familiarisation.
Appropriate time, yes. Okay, thank you, Graham. So, yes, we had a small item. Peter and I talked a few weeks ago about external legal support. That I felt perhaps the audit committee should have some view of the interaction with whoever it is we look to provide that support in terms of asking the legal question. Because coming back to the Habitat Swan, that went to an external counsel without knowledge or sight of the question that was being asked. I think it was suggested perhaps that was something we could add into the audit committee function to interact with your legal team on what those questions should look like, or at least have a view of what they should look like.
Chairman, I wouldn't be averse to that, having oversight of what's being asked of council, as long as there's no conflict internally about the purpose of going out for legal advice.
There raised questions at the time. We didn't actually know what questions were being asked, and therefore the response was a little bit unconnected.
Sure, it's appropriate, and I can think of examples through where we've been out for advice on property matters that, in terms of our investment strategy, which you have oversight of as a board committee, to ensure we are getting appropriate legal advice on those matters, that the correct questions are being asked.
So how can we introduce that into our work as part of the government statement?
I think it's a matter that we will take up with Robin as the monitoring officer, because it's probably a constitutional matter to bring that in to ensure that that link is made.
Thank you. Any other comments on this section?
Councillor Hyman.
Councillor Hyman. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and Kimberly. Yes, in respect, I haven't entirely had the answer, which links in again very nicely to this. An answer to is the delivering good governance in local government document available to us. We've been asked for another SIPFA document to be sent out by members have just requested. So can we have that so that we know exactly how the terms of reference dictate the actions and decisions of this committee? And similarly, how can we be confident of the law? Because if members are, I appreciate what's just been said, but we do have national planning practice guidance, which is absolutely clear for members on how the law has to be interpreted. And if members aren't satisfied with that, what are they going to rely upon when if they're being given different advice to what's being put out in the national practice guidance? And of course, the action that we have to take, talking about the actions that this committee needs to make, is that in the absence of an appropriate assessment, we can't grant unlimited consents. There is an avenue for granting limited consents when you have an appropriate appropriate assessment if it is not if it doesn't provide all the convincing evidence necessary for members to be of the planning committees or making planning or local plan decisions to make their decisions. But that there is a process. That Habitats doesn't stop all development by any means, although some people would like to paint it as such. But it certainly doesn't. It's there in the law quite clearly. But of course, unless members are made aware of that law accurately, then they're in the same position as me, as having to, as other members have pointed out, bring it up at every meeting because it's our duty to do so under the Nolan principles. And of course, Nolan also says if in doubt, don't do it. You know, where members might claim it's a grey area, so I'm going to carry on regardless. Nolan certainly says if in doubt, don't do it in the 2005 papers. That's 1995 papers when they first brought in the Nolan principles. But in respect of this AGS to approve in front of us, because that's what you're being asked to do, to approve the annual governance statement. At the bottom of page 16, which is page 19 of the PDF I've got, and page 15, I think, or something. I'm not entirely sure what it is in your papers. You might want to tell me. But at the bottom, there's a table which has the principles summary in there, and it says principle 1 in its integrity, demonstrating commitment to ethical values, respecting the rule of law. And when we look at the practice guidance and the 2018 judgment and the Air Quality Act and the Environment Act 2021 as well, in respect of air quality, we don't have an air quality action plan, and the law requires that we do. We haven't had one for many years. And we haven't had a proper one ever since it first brought in 2007. Again, you know, we would certainly be considered to be lacking 2 of the 3 principles, elements of the principle there. That you know, if we're making an annual governance statement and you're agreeing it, expecting the chief executive officer and the leader or whoever to take responsibility for what's being said, then we must make sure that what is being said in there is representative of what's actually going on and not papering over some cracks. Principle 2 is openness and comprehensive stakeholder agreement, and that's an accountability. And we don't have accountability at Waverley at the moment. We don't have a duty of candour, which is absolutely necessary to make sure that we have raised this a number of times through standards and elsewhere, but have been refused. Just a simple element to be added to the Constitution, so that people can be held to account to make sure that the good information is being provided by members and in the advice that we receive. The principles 3 and 4 are interventions to achieve outcomes, and the vision. There isn't really a vision here as yet. It's very difficult for us to say, I think, and members to say with confidence that they can imagine, they can envisage precisely what it is that we're aiming at through, you know, through the administration. And although I'd happily say it might have been better than past administrations, it's not a criticism of this administration alone. It's never been a feature. A vision has never been a feature of Waverley, and it's been said many times that in 99% of things Waverley's excellent and does wonderful work, but it's generally in the major projects issue and the most important things where we do lack slightly, and that's where this committee has responsibility to make sure that we don't lack. Principle 5 says ensuring we've got the capacity, and 7 the accountability of audits. Obviously, when you look at the 2018 judgment saying that of the ECJ, we've never complied. We're still not compliant. So the audit committee certainly obviously doesn't have capacity. Otherwise, we wouldn't still have this problem. But there are other issues which I think perhaps you'll cover under the next item, which is a general discussion. I would like you, please, to just to cover the question of the delivering good governance document. Can we have it, please? And in respect of compliance, why is this committee, when no member of this committee is able to provide me with a compliant, appropriate assessment in accordance with the simple wording of the National Planning Practice Guidance, which tells you how the law must be interpreted, why on earth is this committee not saying, look at this, it's blindingly obvious to anyone who reads this that we're not, and it is just guidance, that the law is clear enough in itself, that we must not be granting consents in this situation, yet we're just carrying on blindly. Is it in the hope that someone will come along and change the law and try and take away the rights of the endangered species? I don't know that in this new situation with the new king and the new Lib Dem position on environment, apparently new, that's going to be much of a hope. We need to comply and not turn a blind eye. It's about time. So, if this committee can, through this AGS, as is its responsibility, take responsibility for that, so that someone is doing, that would be very nice. I'll have more to report on Wednesday, but that doesn't mean we can carry on breaking the law until Wednesday or whenever after. There's another meeting on Wednesday night of Western Planning, which is putting forward recommendations in the absence of a complete appropriate assessment. So, when on earth is this going to end? Or is it that Waverley's always going to be known for its past reputation? I hope not, with this new administration. Anyway, if you can, just let me know. Can we have this good governance document? And how can you, as members now, be certain that unless you turn around and get tough and make changes to this AGS, that you're doing the right thing? Because I know otherwise. Thanks very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Your points are noted, as they have been on many occasions when you've made the same statements. As far as I'm concerned, we've had legal opinion which says the council is operating legally. So
that obviously, you've seen the judgment for yourself, I'm sure, and you know what it says, that we have to conduct an appropriate assessment, and nothing has changed. So how can, it's simple logic. I mean, we're not idiots. It's unless people are treating me as though I'm an idiot and disrespecting my rights as a councillor to abide by the law and ensure we're doing so. It's not difficult. It says competent authorities must now assess the robustness of mitigation through appropriate assessment. And members, everyone knows you can't send me one. So how are you complying? Don't treat me like a fool, please. No longer. Enough. Thank you.
I'm sure we would never do that, Councillor Hyman, but we're equally not lawyers, and you have an opinion on these legal matters. I can't help you any further than this. The council is operating legally as far as I'm aware of the legal opinion that we obtained.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. We need to approve the statement, but there are some minor changes. Can we approve this subject to those minor changes being made? Happy with that?
I will be.
Good. Consider this approved then, thank you. Right, moving on to item 9. Consideration of potential government issues. Is there anything else we need to say on this item? Councillor Wilson.
I think it's basically saying that if anybody wants to raise any points, as Councillor Hyman seems to have done, then
That's covered by that.
yeah, that's it. We've done it.
Good. All agreed? Yes.
Agreed.
Item 10.
We're going to leave you to it, councillors.
Any questions? Right. Councillor Hyman, would you like to speak on something specifically different?
Well, yes, actually, because we were talking in the last item about the annual government statement for 21-22, and this item's talking about the annual government statement for 22-23. I think, am I correct? Would officers just point that out to members?
Yeah, yes, you are correct.
Thank you. Yes, so we're talking about the current year now. And I've spoken about habitats, and I don't need to repeat myself on those. But air quality, I've also mentioned 15 years of a pretensive air quality action plan. There was a 2016 fraud incident, and we still have no air quality action plan. No air quality scrutiny. I gather there's a new air quality board, which I think is an executive function on Wednesday is the first, I think, but being the person with the most experience of this and having brought air quality forward and worked it through over the past 6 years, I doubt if I'll be expected. I doubt if I can expect to be invited to that. In respect of enforcement plan, that's later on your agenda, but we still don't have an enforcement plan, and this is probably highly relevant to other issues like the ongoing Brightwell's. What will I call it? Ongoing Brightwell's issues. I attended the last executive meeting. At the end of the webcast, if anybody would like to look, the responses to my questions in respect of Brightwell's and outstanding planning consents and the way that's being handled, the responses that were given to me were simply untrue, and that brings up the issues of the duty of candour. You know, we need to be able to make sure that the information being provided by members of the executive, whether it's their own opinions or the advice they're being provided with from elsewhere, or just guesswork, I don't know. But you need to make sure that they are that the information that members are being given is good information, accurate information, and all the information necessary to make proper decisions, because that's what governance is all about, and that's what this committee is all about. So I do think that we need, on working from home, similarly, I mean, there's a pretense of having debated it at overview and scrutiny, and I've seen this repeated somewhere within the last a couple of items. I did notice that. I raised the issue that it hasn't actually, and that when I tried to raise it, I was not allowed to, and indeed for even trying to, I was reported to the Standards Committee by 2 people for trying to raise the issue, and that was after the March 2021 ONS meeting. At which officers are still claiming that it has been debated, and it wasn't. So you know, the risks there and the issues there that we're starting to see, not necessarily just with the council, but across whether it's passport offices and you know, all sorts of backlogs in local government, in perhaps more so in central government perhaps than we're suffering. But you know, these are issues that need to be looked at. And as I say, the duty of candour has been refused. So these are all important issues. You know, standards as well. I mean, if I can be dragged through the Standards Committee for telling the truth on legal matters once and then dragged through it again after I've apologised, being asked for an apology, and the expense to the members of the public, you know, that's an expense that this audit committee should speak against. So, sorry, I can't see the people on the right of the screen, and I can't hear very well what you're saying there.
Could I ask you to stop? You've made a lot of comments there, but I don't see where you're heading with this.
Well, it was just in response to the item, Chairman. That's what the item's for. I'm sorry, I perhaps shouldn't have attended. We are meant to be according to the to the delivery of good governance statement to ensure there's sound and inclusive decision making, and obviously if that's not what we're really going to get, then just let the residents that we represent know that. Thank you.
I don't think that's relevant in the sense of what we're trying to do here. From a lot of garbage that you talk about. Now, if you have a specific issue to make a specific issue and deal with it as one. I've asked you this before, to write the case. If you think there are some weaknesses or some, say, wrong or bad decisions being made, please write it down. I'm not prepared to listen to the way you present your case. Make it specific, please.
I've been specific on 7 different areas there. I think there's 6 different areas there.
You don't need a 50-minute dialogue on what these are. Just write them down for us to discuss.
They've all been addressed previously. And these are not new issues. These are ongoing and have been for many, many years. And a main reason why the administration changed. But I've said enough for now. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Right. Have we done with item 9?
We have dealt with 9.9, Chairman.
Item 10, review progress of the implementation of internal audit actions, page 29 to 44.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Yes, in this paper, I present in Annex 1 the actions that are either overdue or those are due to be implemented by the 30th of September. And you will see from the content, there is quite a few of those that are due to be implemented by the 30th of September.
Mhm.
There are those that haven't yet been implemented by their originally agreed due target date, and officers have included in Annex 2 requests for extensions for those that they feel that are not going to be implemented by the original their target date of the 30th of September. And I also have Sally Busby, who's going to speak about the ones relating to planning, which Councillor Hyman obviously did indicate relating to the enforcement plan, which is one of those recommendations, one of those actions.
Sally, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I will just caveat that I'm speaking on behalf of Zach Elwood, obviously, and I, in all honesty, haven't been involved in the local enforcement plan, so I will be just reading from information that I have been given by Zach, which is the first outstanding item, which is the target response time for the planning enforcement plan. Zach's final comment on this is that an updated and drafted local planning enforcement plan has been produced, but it is not sufficiently advanced to a state to enable a fulsome discussion by the committee at this time and requires some further work. The suggestion is that the LPEP will come to the Services ONS for consideration on the 22nd of November and will then go to Executive on the 18th of January.
Sally, can I ask you which of the action items are you referring to in Zach's area?
So the target response time, I'm sorry, it's IA 2008.001.
IA 22, did you say? Sorry.
20.
No, IA
20.
20, yeah.
First two on the schedule,
That's
or
okay.
Annex 1, which is page 32 of the agenda.
Yeah.
And both of those items will be covered in the new LPEP.
Mr. Chairman?
Can I ask a question there? In the notes here, it says the extension request until March 23, as the action is dependent upon the approval of the local plan. How does that connect with what you've just told us?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Forgive me.
I'm reading the status here,
Yeah.
and Zach, I think, has written that you're requesting an extension till March 23.
Oh, I see, because of the
This action is
local
dependent
plan
on the
part 2.
approval of the local
Yeah.
plan. I'm just not quite seeing the connection with the local
So-
plan from what you said.
Well, so the local plan part 2 is currently under review by the inspector,
Yeah.
which is obviously that's something that's delaying where we are. So that's why it's to a point which is, so it's sufficiently advanced to that point, but the local planning enforcement plan does tie in with local plan part 2, and we need that signed off by the inspector before the final local plan enforcement plan will be submitted.
Thank you. Do we have any idea when the inspector will give his decision?
So they had on Tuesday this past week, Chair, they had second final questions. So I would imagine we're looking at it'd be October that they'll have the second review. And I don't know when the final plan will come back. I can find that out for you, but I know October will be the second review.
Oh, that's okay. Well, it'll be what it is. So this
Yeah.
item is waiting until that review comes back.
I mean, I am heartened by. Sorry, forgive me.
Okay. Carry on, sorry.
So the inspector is at liberty to come back on with more than one occasion of questioning, and this we only had one request for questioning, which was this Tuesday just passed. So it is a prompter process for the local plan part 2 than it was before.
Thank you, Chair. I guess you have to ask the question, what happens if the inspector chooses not to approve the plan? And he did indicate that the earliest he was likely to produce his report was sort of early into next year. But that was the earliest. It may drag on. This is already getting on for 2 years overdue. And you've actually indicated that, as a colleague here just pointed out, that it doesn't actually follow on that if it's going to scrutiny at the next scrutiny meeting and then it's going to executive, why does it have to wait for the local plan to be completed? I'm just worried this is going on and on and on. And to be blunt, we're not all particularly enamoured with the performance of the enforcement, planning enforcement. It is often quite a challenge to get things done quickly and firmly, and this plan is needed. So what's the point? I think the point there is what happens if the inspector doesn't get this plan, doesn't get the local plan part 2 approved in the time schedule that this request is being based on. Because I can see, see it dragging on another 6 or 9 months after that. It's linked.
My opinion, this is Zach's ultimate decision at the moment, but my opinion on this, Councillor Seaborn, is that wouldn't then delay the LPEP any further. But that's at the point with which a further decision would then be made. It wouldn't be delayed. We cannot, in my opinion, delay the local planning enforcement plan any further. It's, as I said, I'm potentially speaking out of turn here because this is Zach's ultimate decision. But my position would be, if I was asked, and I'll relay this back to Zach, that this wouldn't be, we can't put the local planning enforcement plan on hold any longer. I do see the correlation between the two at the stage that we are now. It makes sense with the progress that we've made on the enforcement plan to see the outcome. Now that we are at the 11th hour. However, should it be delayed again, my opinion would be that it would not delay this plan. It's quite a crucial, as you say, it's quite crucial to moving forward.
Sally, are you saying the enforcement plan could be issued now? Could it could meet at least this action timescale?
So well, I mean, the position of the enforcement plan, no, it's not ready to be released. However, what I am saying is the point with which it's at, it may as well, it is absolutely sensible for it to wait for the outcome of the local plan part 2. The local planning enforcement plan isn't sufficiently at a point for that to be released, Chair, no.
So what you suggested from what you said earlier, that it's not, you can't delay it any longer. I mean, we are delaying it till the local plan is approved.
Yeah, so it's not finished. The local plan enforcement plan isn't completed. It's not sufficiently along the way where it's ready for release. So given that fact, and the fact of where we are along with local plan part 2, it makes sense for that to correlate. It does make sense for that to review the outcome of the other. However, that's not, I don't believe, and again, it's not my ultimate decision, but I don't believe that if the local plan does extend, that it would be necessary to extend the delivery of the local planning enforcement plan.
So, can I come back? Sorry, Sally, can I just ask, you said that, or maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought you said that this plan in draft form was going to go to scrutiny and then to the executive.
Yes, that's my understanding from Zach. Forgive me, Councillor Seaborn, I don't know that. That's the information I have been given. The information here, forgive me, it says local planning enforcement plan will come to the ONS for your consideration in November 22. And then will be referred to the executive in January 23.
In which case it could come to council and be approved if everyone's happy, could it not?
Yes. It doesn't appear from what you said that it is actually dependent on the local plan.
No, it's not dependent. Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Graham.
Well, thank you, Chairman, Sally, and thank you as well. And members, this doesn't fall within Sally's remit. Thank you, Sally, for passing on Zach's comments on this. I think so. Chairman, the Audit Committee can pass comments to the executive at any point in its activity. The consideration and approval of an enforcement plan is an executive function, not a planning committee's one. It's part of the policy framework. And therefore, the executive propose a plan to council, and on its route, it's going to be subject to scrutiny. And therefore, I think if the audit committee have concerns around the governance in relation to an outstanding audit plan, and you've heard Sally's explanation passed on from Zach. You can minute today that you have concerns around the timing of the enforcement plan. And I can't remember, I think it was Councillor Seaborn said, this seems like we've been waiting for it for some time. So I think if you wanted to articulate that as an audit committee, then do so to the executive. I'm not sure Sally's going to be able to give you any more information today because it's not within Sally's remit. And I think if this committee has concerns about the timing, full stop, or the timing in relation to local plan part 2, then I think pass that observation to the executive, and I'm sure the portfolio holder will give that due consideration, Chairman.
Grant, yes, we should do that. Okay. Next item, Sally,
yes, sorry, can I, Annex 2 is where the committee would have to agree to any extensions that heads of service have requested. Yes, this is one of the actions.
The extension requirement is linked to the approval of the local plan. And I think what we're saying around the table is that we need to disconnect that from the local plan part 2 implementation or approval, and to implement the enforcement plan as quickly as is possible, going through the necessary process of ONS and the executive approval. Is that my understanding of the view around the table?
yes, the point was we couldn't disconnect it.
Yeah.
No, what she was saying was that they want to.
There's a desire to link it.
There's a desire.
But it's not an absolute. And I think, following up from what Councillor Seaborn was saying, let's get this into place as that.
Because it could be amended after
Yeah,
the
it could
local
be
plan is
always
approved.
changed later on, for heaven's sake.
So do you know, Sally, if we were to approve an extension of this, what would be a sensible extension time to get this particular document completed?
I mean, I can only go on Zach's recommendation because Zach does have a plan of how the LPEP is at the stage that it's at and what's remaining. So forgive me if I'm vague, Chair, but I can only go on Zach's recommendation.
As there is no services ONS until November, and then the next appropriate executive is January. That means that January is it's got to be finished by November to go to services.
Well,
it's got to be at the point where it can go to services.
so that
in
should
draft
be the extension time given. Yeah.
Yes.
Sally, do you get that?
Understood. Yeah, understood. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Resources need to be advised to include this on their agenda, if I may.
I clerk services, so I will ensure that it is on the service. It was on for
Okay.
a couple of weeks' time, but over.
So do we agree to the extension on those terms?
So you're agreeing for it to be completed in draft form by November 22
Also for resources.
for the services.
For services, yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Then we have the reconciliation, on annex to the second head of service, which was Richard Holmwood, who'd asked that for extensions to the 31st of October for reconciliations, and also January 2023 for disputed invoices, where he's provided a justification for the extension for both of those.
The reconciliation item. When it comes down to it, it's a software issue again, isn't it? In this case, part of it is the problem of entering data into the system and errors that are introduced with doing that. Well, it has to be entered in some form. Manual processes introduce errors. Is there a way of mitigating those errors? I mean, perhaps if it's important enough, it should be entered twice. So errors picked up by comparing files that are produced.
Well, I think this is where obviously regarding the reconciling both systems, because obviously they talk about the Civica system, and then we've got the aggressive system, it's a financial system.
Yeah.
And I think this is an element of, I think we have to get better at, as when we actually are developing systems, that we ensure that it is speaking to our key system, which is our key financial system, which is our aggressive system, the financial management system. So what the teams have been trying to do is obviously to try and complete this reconciliation, but obviously it is taking longer than what we thought it was going to be taken to resolve.
So where is the actual issue then with this? Is it a software interfacing issue? It talks about manual, a manual interface.
Yes, I think this is where the system, you'll have to forgive me if I didn't get this totally accurate, with the Civica system is the system that is used by the environmental services team. So of course the information that they've then got obviously doesn't then agree with the information that has gone into finance, and it may be some of the information hasn't gone across, and this is why obviously we're trying to establish how those issues have occurred, so that we can actually learn from those to make sure that staff are then trained to ensure that the full information, if it goes into the Civica system, it's the same information that's going across into the aggressive system in the finance side.
But this is where the errors are occurring in that transfer.
Well, I think the problem being that they're trying to identify where the errors are, so we can establish what has caused those errors, so that we can in effect close the door on those. So there may be a learning and training and development need for those staff that are dealing with these particular systems.
Maybe misreading the numbers, but it looks like a very small sum of money which is at issue in terms of reconciliation.
Yes, because
is it not just possible? Don't waste too much time trying to make a reconciliation on things and finding something which is probably will, in my past experience of completing these reconciliations, will be invented. Leave it and just get on for, as you focus purely on the issue of getting the correct process in place.
well, then that may be a decision that the head of service.
But I think that we may well be spending far too much resource just chasing up something which is fairly trivial. But the finance people, Peter, may well have a disagreement on that.
I'll have a comment, Joe.
Okay. I think really one needs to look at what is going to be of benefit rather than just trying to chase down a relatively paltry difference.
Yeah, I think this particular review was on our waste management regarding bins, because we did have an issue, regarding how many bins we're actually got in stock, etc. Because obviously they're held by a third party on our behalf for them to go and deliver. So therefore, it was felt it was important that we needed to get to a starting point to establish where we start from to actually move forward, to actually ensure that the processes and procedures we've got in place are much tighter than what they had been before.
I agree with you, but I feel concerned that we're wasting a lot of time and resource on something which could be very trivial.
Chair, with respect on this one as well, it's not that much overdue. It's not asking for a big extension, and
it's 2 months. It's 2 months overdue, and they're only asking for an extra month from now.
and the work's underway.
So we just leave this.
I'll shut up. I'm obviously wasting everybody else's
No,
time.
I agree. We shouldn't be dealing with trivia, but
I think
it's tens of thousands.
Yeah, because I think the other point being is, which you made yourself, Councillor Seaborn, earlier on, is the fact that we will have been able to produce the accounts on time. So of course there have been sacrifices that had to be made to put that resource into achieving that. Whereas obviously on the finance side, where it was dealing with this, would have been involved in that process as well.
Okay.
So it's a way of, they are trying to manage the resources we've got, and again, taking the point that so mentioned regarding the value of it. No, it is still to be of value, but it's not top priority at the top of the list.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I am happy to support the request for an extension on that one.
And I think the last one that we've got on there is the few, again, this is relating to the team that have been involved in dealing with the homes for Ukraine, making sure the payments have been going out. So therefore, they haven't, at this time, they haven't actually achieved the original deadline. And therefore, they've then asked for an extension to the end of September, which of course is a few weeks' time. On the recommendations numbers, i.e. 22 to 0.003.1 and 2.2.
So do we approve this extension?
Very little option.
Again, it's minor in terms of time, and if it's not delivered by the end of September, our next chance to gripe is November, so it should be fixed by then.
Chairman, so I'm confident it will be sorted out by then.
Okay, so that's approved. Anything else, Karen, Sarah, that we should be concerned with?
No, nothing else on that. Or disputed invoice. Oh, sorry, there's a disputed invoice. Sorry, just pointed out is IE 2283.1. Again, this is, you can see where the head of services provided the justification for this. Again, taking on board council's previous comment, the team were obviously dealing with other issues within the service area. And it is hoped that therefore they were requesting an extension to January. And this was regarding mist bins, where the contractor had put an invoice related to mist bins. There was discussion around as to what should be a mist bin, what shouldn't be a mist bin. And again, obviously, we having gone through COVID, etc., obviously there would be more of a partnership approach with the contractor to ensure continuity of service or continuation of service, obviously to make sure that our bins are still in way they're still being emptied, etc. So that's between the lines. That's why the head of service is now asking for an extension to January.
Well, these actually missed bins, or people putting the bins out late.
It does happen, yes, and then they phone up to see the bin's been missed. Unfortunately, it does happen. And again, technically, it's actually no classification as to when it is in this bin, and that's where the disputed invoices comes in regarding what's in the contract and what is actually determined as being a misspent.
Okay, do we grant this extension again? Yeah. So, may I ask a question about one of the other items here? It's 06 spot 002, which I think is on page 41. It's the review interim measure, it says. It's about rent recovery procedures. I note that the notes there say system administrator to review arrangement process April 22. Has there been any update on that, or what has happened to that particular item?
Oh, sorry, yes, that was to review review on 2.1. No, I haven't got a response to that. I'm sorry.
Seems sort of
Yeah.
disappeared off into the ether.
Yes, it could be they've actually, I did finished off to 1.2, but they haven't actually marked that one is actually complete.
Indeed.
Because it is the heads of service who go into our monitoring system in Tana. It's their responsibility to ensure that they update the system so that in effect when I produce the report, it should be a matter of pressing the button. We like to think that's what happens, but obviously there are some minor changes I have to make regarding bringing items down into the Annex 2, etc. for extension. So that's a separate report that I have to do manually because that's not generated from the Pintana system.
Okay. Good. Nothing else to.
No, I think we've gone through all the extensions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's the moment.
Okay. Let's move on to
Item 11.
item 11. Yes. Progress in the Shield plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take this one. This is the report that the committee get every cycle, read the progress on the internal audit plan. And as you will see from the annex, those reviews that were planned to be started in Q1 and 2 have been started. They've not yet been finished, of course, but they have been started. And at the moment, there's 30% on the progress, and yet there is 60% still to be still to commence. But that is in line with what we had in the plan, because we must take into consideration the contractor that we have doesn't just have our workload to schedule in their quarters, so therefore they have to plan it out. And again, the starting period, the quarters are actually agreed by the heads of service before, after the audit committee agreed the plan in March. The heads of service then agree what quarters is going to be completed, and then the plan comes back to the audit committee in the June, usually June committee, for further update on how we do. And you can see on page there, page 11. Yeah.
So that would be page 59.
Page 59 on the agenda. You will see there was some reviews that have been added to the plan, and the majority of these, apart from one, were completed by me or carried out by me, where I was required to complete those. So therefore, you'll see from the plan itself, there is 2 reviews that I have in the plan for myself, which I haven't yet started, because obviously I've been focusing on the additional reviews that were more urgent to the book time.
Now, I just clarify what I think you just said. You said, I'm looking at the dashboard on page 53, and where it says 0% complete. I understand you saying that is fairly normal for this point of the cycle.
Yes.
Of audit, so I shouldn't be alarmed at seeing that.
No. Again, as we get through into Q3, when we come into November, I would then be at least all the Q1s should be finished, and if not, most of the majority of the Q2
Okay.
reviews. again, we have to appreciate the going on, the collaboration that's happening. Obviously, officers are dealing with lots of different projects, shall we say, that are going on. Obviously, the accountants are dealing with the financial accounts, and we'll then be dealing with the external auditors coming in. And that's why we try and schedule it to try and make it as least disruptive as possible. So that's why you then find it's not until the Q4 you then start to see the progress actually happening. And it's related more to people responding if people are off on leave and different things like that. So sometimes it can logistically it can be quite difficult to get things to that end point.
Yeah.
But the point being for us, we don't actually pay the contractor until they've actually delivered their draft report. So basically, in effect, they get paid on delivery rather than being paid in quarterly payments, which in effect is an incentive for them to make sure that they complete the work in a timely fashion to enable them to be reimbursed for the work that's completed.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Just think aloud on this one. We're working on an annual basis. So we have an annual program, and presumably all the audit work should be essentially complete by the end of the year. So if you start a piece of work in 4Q, they've got to get the report out in 4Q as well. Are they not in order?
An audit, as audit, even as internal audit, you're always working behind, because for you to actually carry out any transaction testing, if you're actually doing transaction tests, there are some reviews you would actually leave to the end of the year, so that you've actually got a whole year's transactions.
Right, and then, so you will be rolling on into the next year.
Yes.
All that's flagging this is the fact that we've actually 5 months into the year, we've only got 2 draft reports and no completed reports. Are you essentially telling us that there will have been reports completed during 1Q for the end?
Previous year, yes.
And we're just not seeing that. Okay,
Yes.
because
Well, you would have had knowledge of them because they would have been in last year's audit plan. And of course, the last audit plan you had for last year, I think came to you in June. And I think in that one, I think there was probably 2. One was data storage, and it might be fees and charges, I think were the 2 that fell over into the to this year for completion. They'd started it last year, but they just hadn't completed them. And again, that can be a combination of their availability, our availability, or maybe they're not getting the information they required at that time to complete within the end of the year. For all the time I've been here at Waverley, I think there's probably been 1 year we've actually done everything in the whole calendar year, within the calendar year.
Yeah.
And that's because at that point, the resources that the contractor had was actually more at the front of the year rather than at the back end of the year.
No, what you're saying,
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense to have it any other way than rolling over, but it's just the fact that we look at this year's programme and 5 months in, there's no completed reports and only 2.
Going to find out.
But what you're telling us is there's no cause for concern after that. It's all on track.
Not at this stage.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. And give up committee notes the contents of the audit progress report.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to item 12. Annual work programme. Last page. Page 622. Anything to note here?
I was going to ask a question. Are we still planning on having a special meeting in October for the statement of accounts and external audit findings report? Or are they going to be pushed over to the November meeting?
The answer is November meeting.
It'll be pushed to the November meeting. Thank you.
We've got two dates in November.
And one other thing, in the previous discussion, Kimberly, you talked about the inter-authority agreement.
We did, yes, indeed. So I will, as we
add
had earlier, I'll add that to the June
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank you.
Do we need to make a note of any of the additional non-public
Yeah,
internal
no, because
discussions.
we will do, you meaning like the
Like
risk
the risk
register and things.
separate, yeah.
We will put them in as informal briefings,
Right.
and then they'll just be incorporated into the annual report next year
Okay.
to say that we had those informal briefings.
And good luck with trying to schedule us all in.
Yes. You may get a, at midnight on Christmas Eve or something like that.
That's
I don't know. Oh, okay.
Fancy dressing.
Graham's got his hand up.
Graham.
Chairman, I think Councillor Davison just mentioned then the governance arrangements around the inter-authority agreement on the collaboration. I apologise. What I'd forgotten was, when I was suggesting the audit committee did that, was that actually the councils have already put governance arrangements in place to do just that, which is there is a specific joint governance committee specifically for that purpose that the councils agreed at the same time as the inter-authority agreement. So I think I had forgotten about that when I suggested that the governance could come via the audit committee, but I don't think it's necessary, and I think there's a danger you would duplicate. I mean, I'll leave it with the committee to decide, but that was specifically dealt with by both councils at the time when the inter-authority agreement was set up. So there are governance arrangements in place already. So just something to bear in mind there, Chairman.
I think if that's the case, Graham, it's not really our role to, as you said, to duplicate. All that we can do is say that, is there a governance process in place? And from what you're saying, there is, tick the box.
Indeed, and apologies, I forgot that that's what the council set up at the same time earlier in the year, actually. So it is covered, the governance of the IEA, so yeah, I wouldn't want you to sort of duplicate a piece of work that's already been in hand. Now, clearly, you can track what that governance committee does, and hopefully you will be reassured that that box can be ticked, Deputy Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, so then we have simply to note, is the work programme noted? Thank you. Okay, that completes the agenda. Yes. Graham, I guess this will be your last audit meeting. Can I, on behalf
Yes, it will, Chairman. Yes, yeah.
Can I, on behalf of all of us, the committee, give you thanks for your pearls of wisdom and guidance and generally keeping us all in order. That's appreciated, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Wish you well in your future endeavours.
Thank you.
Relax.
I'll try.
Good.